A picture-perfect family unravels when a husband's affair with a kindergarten teacher leads to a deadly confrontation. How did love, lies, and obsession destroy lives? Subscribe to find out and share where you're tuning in from. October 12, 1997, Bellevue, Ohio. The quiet town of Bellevue was the kind of place where everyone felt safe. Neighbors waved to one another on their way to work. Kids rode their bikes until the streetlights came on, and church bells rang every Sunday morning. It was the sort of town where nothing bad was ever supposed to happen. That's why the call to 911 at 6:14 a.m. on October 12, 1997, shocked everyone. "I think my wife is dead," the voice on the line said, shaking with panic. It was David Cooper, a respected insurance agent in his late 30s. He sounded distraught, his words barely coherent as he begged for help. When first responders arrived at the Cooper family home, they found David pacing in the driveway, his hands trembling, his face pale. Inside the house, in the master bedroom, lay the lifeless body of 34-year-old Emily Cooper. She was still in her nightgown, her head tilted awkwardly to the side, bruises darkening her neck. The once pristine room showed signs of a struggle: a broken lamp on the floor, a picture frame shattered on the nightstand. David told officers that he had woken up early to check on his wife, only to find her unresponsive. "I thought she was just sleeping," he said, tears streaming down his face. But as investigators surveyed the scene, something about his story didn't sit right. Emily's injuries didn't match a peaceful death, and the more they looked, the more questions they had. Emily and David Cooper seemed to have it all. They were high school sweethearts who married young and quickly became the pride of Bellevue. Emily was a kindergarten teacher, known for her warmth and patience. Parents adored her and children loved her gentle nature. David was just as beloved, running a successful insurance business and volunteering at the local youth center. Together, they had 2 children, 10-year-old Lily and 7-year-old Max. To anyone who knew them, the Coopers were the perfect family. But perfection, as investigators would soon discover, was an illusion. 2 days later, the results of Emily's autopsy confirmed what detectives had already suspected. She had died from manual strangulation. There were no signs of forced entry into the house, ruling out the possibility of a random intruder. The case officially became a homicide investigation, and David Cooper, as the only adult in the home that night, became the prime suspect. Word spread quickly through Bellevue. People couldn't believe it. David Cooper, a man who had spent years building his reputation as a loving husband and devoted father, now faced whispers of suspicion. But as police dug deeper into the Coopers' lives, they uncovered a secret that would change everything. Detective Rachel Morgan led the investigation. She was meticulous, known for her ability to connect the dots others missed. Her first step was to piece together a timeline of the Coopers' final days. Neighbors reported seeing David mowing the lawn that Saturday afternoon while Emily played with the kids in the front yard. Everything seemed normal, but as Morgan delved further, she found inconsistencies in David's behavior. Phone records revealed several late-night calls to an unknown number. When Morgan traced the number, it led to someone in town, a woman named Claire Reynolds, a kindergarten teacher at Emily's school. Claire Reynolds was in her early 30s, single, and well-liked by parents at the school. She had been teaching alongside Emily for nearly 5 years, and the two were considered friends. But behind the friendly smiles and polite conversations, Claire and David had been hiding something, an affair that had started over a year ago. It began innocently enough: chats at school events, friendly exchanges at parent-teacher meetings. But soon those conversations turned into late-night phone calls, secret lunches, and eventually stolen moments in motels on the outskirts of town. For David, Claire was an escape from the pressures of his perfect life. For Claire, David was someone who made her feel special in a way she hadn't felt before. But their affair wasn't as discreet as they thought. 3 weeks before her death, Emily confided in her best friend, Sarah Campbell, during their weekly coffee meetup. Sarah later told detectives that Emily had been suspicious for months. David had become distant, spending more time at work and constantly glued to his phone. She had even overheard him whispering late at night, though he claimed it was just work. Emily's suspicions were confirmed when she found a receipt for a hotel room tucked into David's car visor. She confronted him, but David denied everything, insisting it was for a business meeting. Emily didn't believe him. She told Sarah, "I think there's someone else, but I don't know what to do." Sarah urged Emily to confront David again, but Emily was hesitant. She worried about the kids, about the life they had built. "What if I'm wrong?" she had said. "What if it's all in my head?" But Emily wasn't wrong. On the night of October 11th, 1997, neighbors reported hearing raised voices coming from the Cooper house. It was unusual. Emily and David rarely fought. Around 9:45 p.m., the shouting stopped abruptly. A few hours later, Emily was dead. Detectives believed the argument centered around Claire Reynolds. Confronted with her husband's lies, Emily may have demanded the truth, and David's carefully constructed world began to crack. But was the argument enough to push him to murder? As investigators pieced together the final hours of Emily's life, they knew one thing for certain. David Cooper had secrets, and those secrets were about to come to light. October 13th, 1997, Bellevue Police Department. By the morning after Emily Cooper's death, her husband David had gone from grieving spouse to prime suspect. The evidence against him, though circumstantial, was piling up. The timeline, the lack of forced entry, and the autopsy pointing to manual strangulation, all of it pointed to someone inside the house. And David, as the only adult present that night, had nowhere to hide. Detective Rachel Morgan brought David in for questioning. Sitting across from him in the sterile, brightly lit interrogation room, she studied his demeanor. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his hands trembling slightly as he sipped from the cup of water she had given him. But there was something else. Beneath the facade of grief, Morgan sensed a nervousness, an edge, like he was holding something back. "David," Morgan began, her tone calm but firm, "we know Emily didn't die from natural causes. The autopsy confirms she was strangled. Can you explain what happened that night?" David's eyes widened and he shook his head. "I don't know, I told you. I woke up and she wasn't breathing. I tried to wake her up, but she was gone." Morgan leaned forward, her voice steady. "David, neighbors reported hearing an argument coming from your house around 9:45 p.m. What were you and Emily fighting about?" David hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table. We argued about money," he finally said. "Emily thought I was spending too much on the business. She was upset, but it wasn't anything serious. We went to bed after that. I swear, that's all it was." But Morgan wasn't convinced. She pressed further. "Did you ever hurt Emily, David? Did things get physical?" "No," David snapped, his voice rising. "I loved her. I would never hurt her." Meanwhile, detectives continued digging into David's life. His phone records became a critical piece of evidence. Over the past 3 months, he had made nearly 100 calls to Claire Reynolds, many of them late at night or during hours when he claimed to be working. Detective Morgan brought Claire in for questioning the same afternoon. Claire, visibly nervous, fidgeted with her hands as she sat across from Morgan. Her polished, professional appearance was in stark contrast to the anxiety in her eyes. "Claire," Morgan began, "we know you've been in contact with David Cooper, frequently. Can you explain the nature of your relationship?" Claire's face flushed. "David and we've been close," she admitted, "but it's not what you think. We're just friends." Morgan didn't buy it. She slid a stack of phone records across the table. "Friends don't call each other in the middle of the night, Claire. Let's not waste time. Were you having an affair with David?" Claire's shoulders slumped. She let out a shaky breath. "Yes, she said quietly. We were seeing each other, but I had nothing to do with what happened to Emily. I didn't know she was dead until this morning. Morgan studied her carefully. When was the last time you spoke to David? Friday night, Claire replied. He called me around 10. He said he and Emily had argued again, and he was frustrated. I told him he needed to figure things out with her, for the kids' sake. Morgan raised an eyebrow. So, he told you about the argument? Yes, Claire said quickly, but that's it. I swear, I didn't hear from him after that. Detectives now had confirmation of the affair, but they still lacked the evidence to tie David directly to Emily's death. They reviewed the timeline again, looking for any gaps or inconsistencies. That's when they noticed something odd. David's call to Claire at 10 p.m. didn't line up with his claim that he and Emily had gone to bed shortly after their argument. What had he been doing in the hours between the fight and when he allegedly found her unresponsive the next morning? Detective Morgan returned to the Cooper house, searching for anything they might have missed. In the trash, she found something that raised even more questions, a crumpled note written in Emily's handwriting. It read, "We need to talk about Claire. I can't keep pretending everything's okay." The note, though incomplete, painted a clear picture. Emily had confronted David about the affair, and it hadn't gone well. October 15th, 1997, Bellevue Police Department. With the note in hand, Morgan called David back in for questioning. This time, her approach was more direct. "We know about the affair, David," she said, placing the note on the table in front of him. "Emily knew too. She confronted you, didn't she?" David's face drained of color. I didn't mean for her to find out," he stammered. "It was a mistake. The affair was a mistake, but I didn't kill her." Morgan wasn't letting him off the hook that easily. "David, the evidence keeps piling up. You argued with your wife about Claire. She knew about the affair, and hours later she's dead. If you didn't kill her, then who did?" David buried his face in his hands. "I don't know," he said, his voice muffled. "I don't know." Just as detectives felt they were hitting a wall, a surprising tip came in. A neighbor, Patricia Hall, came forward with information she had initially dismissed as unimportant. She told police she had seen David leaving the house around midnight the night of Emily's death. "I thought it was strange," Patricia said, "but I figured he was just going to the store or something." This revelation blew a hole in David's story. If he had left the house at midnight, where had he gone? And why hadn't he mentioned it? Detectives subpoenaed surveillance footage from a nearby gas station, and sure enough, David's car was spotted pulling into the lot at 12:23 a.m. The footage showed him exiting the vehicle, walking to a payphone and making a call. But to whom? Records revealed the call had been made to Claire Reynolds. When detectives confronted Claire with this information, her story began to shift. "He called me that night," she admitted, tears in her eyes. "He sounded panicked. He said, 'It's over. I can't fix this.' I didn't know what he meant at the time. But now I think he was talking about Emily." David Cooper's world was crumbling. His lies, the affair, and now his secret midnight phone call, everything was unraveling. But despite the mounting evidence, he maintained his innocence, insisting he had nothing to do with Emily's death. Detectives weren't convinced. They believed the fight over Claire had escalated into violence, and David, in a fit of rage, had killed his wife. But without a confession, the case was far from closed. As Bellevue buzzed with rumors and speculation, detectives prepared to tighten the noose around David Cooper. The perfect life he had worked so hard to build was gone, and the truth was closing in. October 16th, 1997, Bellevue Police Department. The walls were closing in on David Cooper. His midnight phone call to Claire Reynolds had shifted the investigation into high gear. For Detective Rachel Morgan, the evidence was becoming undeniable. But what Morgan needed now was something concrete, something to tie David directly to Emily's murder. Until then, she couldn't bring him to justice. David was brought in for a third round of questioning. This time, Morgan wasn't pulling any punches. She laid out everything they had: the note Emily wrote about Claire, the neighbor's sighting of David leaving the house, the gas station footage, and the phone call to Claire. "David," Morgan said, her voice sharp but steady, "you've been lying to us from the start. You didn't go to bed after the argument. You left the house. You called Claire, and now Emily is dead. So tell me, what happened that night?" David's hands trembled as he ran them through his hair. "I told you I didn't hurt her," he insisted, his voice breaking. "Yes, we argued. Yes, I left the house. I needed to clear my head. But when I came back, she was fine. I went to sleep. That's the truth." Morgan's patience was wearing thin. "You expect me to believe that? You expect me to believe that after Emily confronted you about your affair, you just walked away? David, your wife didn't die by accident. She was strangled. Someone killed her. And right now, all the evidence points to you." David's face turned red, a mix of frustration and fear. "You don't understand," he shouted. "I didn't want this to happen. He stopped himself, realizing he had said too much. Morgan leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "Didn't want what to happen, David?" But he clammed up, refusing to say another word. His lawyer, who had been sitting quietly up until that point, called an end to the interview. As David was escorted out, Morgan watched him closely. She knew he was hiding something big, and she was determined to find out what it was. Morgan and her team returned to the Cooper house, determined to find anything that could crack the case wide open. This time, they focused on the master bedroom, where Emily's body had been found. They combed through every inch of the room, looking for anything that might have been missed during the initial search. Their persistence paid off. Tucked under the bed, partially hidden beneath the bed frame, they found a necklace, one that didn't belong to Emily. It was a simple gold chain, delicate and feminine, but unmistakably different from Emily's usual style. Morgan bagged it as evidence and sent it to the lab for testing. At the same time, they revisited the broken lamp found near Emily's body. Forensics revealed something chilling: a partial fingerprint on the base of the lamp, one that didn't match Emily or David. The fingerprint was faint but distinct enough to be analyzed. If it wasn't David's, whose was it? The necklace was the first clue to lead investigators back to Claire Reynolds. When confronted with the discovery, Claire initially denied knowing anything about it. "That's not mine," she said, her voice shaky. But Morgan wasn't convinced. "We found this in the Cooper's bedroom," Morgan said, watching Claire's reaction carefully. "If it's not yours, Claire, then how did it end up there?" Claire's face turned pale. She hesitated for a moment before finally admitting the truth. "It's mine," she whispered, "but I don't know how it got there." "I swear," Morgan pressed further. "Were you at the Cooper house the night Emily died?" "No," Claire cried. "I haven't been there in months. David and we usually met somewhere else. I would never go to their house, especially not with Emily there." Morgan studied her carefully. "You told me David called you that night, panicked. What else did he say, Claire? Did he ask you to come over?" "No," Claire said, shaking her head. "He didn't ask me to come over. He said things had gotten bad with Emily. He said he didn't know what to do, but that's it. That's all he said." Despite her denials, the discovery of Claire's necklace in the Cooper's bedroom raised new questions. Had she been there that night? Was she more involved in Emily's death than she was letting on? Or had David planted the necklace to divert suspicion away from himself? As the investigation continued, the fingerprint on the broken lamp came back from the lab. To everyone's surprise, it didn't match David or Claire. It belonged to someone entirely unexpected: Ryan Cooper, David's younger brother. Ryan, a 28-year-old mechanic, had been staying with the Coopers on and off for the past few months. He had a history of trouble, a string of bar fights, a DUI, and a reputation for being hot-headed. When detectives questioned him, Ryan was evasive, claiming he hadn't been to the Coopers' house in weeks. But the fingerprint told a different story. "Ryan," Morgan said during the interview, "we found your fingerprint on the lamp that was broken during the struggle. How do you explain that?" Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I don't know," he muttered. "Maybe I touched it when I was there last. I don't remember." Morgan wasn't buying it. "Your brother is facing serious charges, Ryan. If you know something, now is the time to speak up." Ryan hesitated, his jaw tightening. Finally, he blurted out, "I wasn't there that night, I swear. But David called me the next morning. He sounded freaked out. He told me to stay quiet, to say I hadn't been at the house." "Why would he say that?" Morgan asked, her voice calm but firm. "I don't know," Ryan said, his voice rising. "I swear I don't know. I didn't kill Emily. I wasn't even there." With David, Claire, and now Ryan all under scrutiny, the case had become more tangled than ever. The evidence pointed in multiple directions, but one thing was clear: someone wasn't telling the truth. Detective Morgan knew that the key to solving Emily's murder lay in breaking the web of lies that surrounded her death. As Bellevue buzzed with rumors, Morgan prepared for the next move. The clock was ticking, and the truth was closer than ever. October 18th, 1997, Bellevue Police Department. With David Cooper, Claire Reynolds, and Ryan Cooper all tied to the investigation, the pressure was mounting. Detective Rachel Morgan knew she was getting closer to uncovering the truth. But the conflicting stories were creating a tangled web. Each interview seemed to raise more questions than answers. Who had the most to lose? Who was lying to protect themselves or someone else? Morgan decided it was time to turn up the heat, starting with David. David was brought back into the interrogation room, where Morgan confronted him with the new evidence: Claire's necklace found in the bedroom and Ryan's fingerprint on the broken lamp. David looked exhausted, his face gaunt, his hands nervously fidgeting on the table. "David," Morgan began, her tone sharp, "your story is falling apart. We found Claire's necklace in your bedroom. We found Ryan's fingerprint on the lamp.